Thank you very much. And our next item of business is topical questions. Our first question today from Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, President Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assistance it's providing to the multi-agency approach to the major gas outage affecting over 8,000 households in Falkirk District.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Matheson.
President Officer, the Scottish Government provides a team in each of the Scottish Regional Resilience Partnerships to help plan and coordinate response arrangements to disruptive events. These resilience officials have been liaising closely with responders since Sunday, including Police Scotland, Falkirk Council, other emergency services and SGN to support what has been an effective multi-agency response. This work will continue until residents are reconnected. The Scottish Government Resilience Team has been actively involved in coordinating response activity within the Scottish Government. Resilience officials have been deployed to the Police Scotland-led Multi-Agency Coordination Centre in Stirling, and the Government's coordination facility, SCORE, has been activated. The fault has been repaired and gas is being restored to the network. The process to safely reconnect customers requires engineers to visit all properties affected. This is now well underway, with an estimated 5,000 customers already back on main supply. SGN engineers, with support from engineers from across the country, are working hard to bring all customers back on supply as quickly as possible.
Angus MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. Progress has moved at a pace since I lodged this question yesterday, with swift progress on reconnecting the thousands of households affected, which has been heartening. And I was pleased to receive a report at midday that more than 5,000 households have now been reconnected. The Cabinet Secretary and I both visited the Control Centre yesterday afternoon to see for ourselves the Resilience Centre in operation, and each and every one of the multi-agency partners have to be praised for the swift action they've taken over the past 50+ hours. The Police, Fire and Rescue, NHS and the Ambulance Service, Falkirk Council, Social Services and Housing Departments, and not forgetting the community effort, all deserve praise for the way the multi-agency approach has been handled. There are, however, questions to be asked once every household has been reconnected to their gas supply. SGN have advised me that they're conducting their own investigation. However, there may be merit in exploring the cause further, and whilst I've received assurances that the Governor, which failed, had been regularly maintained, it may be that a review of maintenance procedures in our gas networks nationwide is overdue. Will the Cabinet Secretary consider requesting a review of the pipeline infrastructure around Scotland with a view to ensuring such a large gas outage is not repeated?
Cabinet Secretary.
Officer, as Angus MacDonald said, I visited the Coordination Centre yesterday in my constituency, along with Angus MacDonald, to meet with the staff and the officials who have been engaged in this process since Sunday afternoon in order to try and rectify the fault and to get customers back online as quickly as possible. I want to offer my thanks and also my praise for the significant amount of work that was undertaken over a very short period of time by a range of partner organisations, from Falkirk Council, the police voluntary organisations and a range of other partners, in helping to support the effort to assist those customers who were left without gas on Monday night and also last night as well. I also took the opportunity to visit St Francis Church Hall, where the local parishioners had come together in order to provide soup and sandwiches and hot drinks for those who required support during a period when they had no access to gas appliances. As Angus MacDonald identified, the fault the SGN have identified has been with one of their gas governors. At this stage, they have advised us that it's not clear as to how that fault has come about, and there is a need for further work to be undertaken in order to identify exactly what the root cause of this particular fault was. That process will be taken forward by SGN. What we would expect is that once that has been completed, that any lessons that need to be learned from this particular incident are brought forward in the form of any further works that may be required to help to improve the resilience of the other gas governors, not just within the Falkirk area, but across the whole of the network. But clearly SGN need to undertake the investigation work into identifying how this fault occurred in the first place, and then to identify whether there are further measures that need to be taken in order to prevent an incident of this type being repeated at some other location across the network.
Angus MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his further reply. I'm sure he joins me in welcoming the confirmation from SGN that compensation will be paid of £30 per household for each complete 24-hour period that residents have had no gas. And in recognition of the severe weather that occurred in the first 24 hours of the incident and the additional electricity residents have had to use to heat their homes, SGN are providing compensation of an additional payment of £30 as a gesture of goodwill, which I'm sure will also be welcomed by the majority of my constituents affected.
Secretary.
Presiding Officer, Mr MacDonald is correct. There is a compensation payment after the first 24 hours of being offline for those customers who have a 24-hour period without gas. That should be provided by their gas supplier, and it should be provided within a relatively short period of time. And I would want to encourage any of his constituents or my own constituents who have been affected by this to make sure that they contact their gas suppliers in order to seek that compensation at an early stage. I've also had discussions with Falkirk Council around those who may be on prepayment electric meters that may find themselves in some financial difficulty as a result of the need to use a greater amount of electricity, and to look at what arrangements could be put in place to assist those with any financial difficulties that may arise through the Scottish Welfare Fund, which I know they are looking to do. So any constituents who may find themselves in that situation should contact Falkirk Council's Scottish Welfare Fund officials, who will provide them with advice and assistance around what they can do in order to meet any financial challenges which they now face as a result of having to make greater use of electricity on a prepaid meter.
Thank you very much. Question 2, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assistance it can give to Scottish Borders Council and the staff and pupils of Peebles High School should it remain closed beyond Christmas, including pupils preparing for their exams.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, my thoughts are with pupils, staff and parents at Peebles High School following the fire at the school, and I pay tribute to the resilience of everyone involved in dealing with this challenging situation. I also pay tribute to our emergency services for their prompt action in addressing this very serious incident. The Scottish Government remains in close contact with Scottish Borders Council and stand ready to provide any support necessary to minimise disruption to pupils' learning. The Council has stated that all pre-Christmas prelim exams have been postponed until the new year to ensure pupils have an opportunity to be fully prepared for these important examinations.
Christine Graham.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. My thoughts too are with the pupils, staff and head teachers at the school, and gratitude too to the Fire and Rescue Services. Cabinet Secretary, I note today's Council announcement to accommodate 1,300 displaced pupils in Peebles and Galashiels. However, this does not work out. Is it feasible for pupils to be decanted out with the Borders, say to Pennycook, which I'm already exploring, having written to both Borders Chief Executive and Midlothian Chief Executive, as both Pennycook High School and Beeslack are well under capacity and only 13 miles from Peebles, Galashiels is 18 miles. And, of course, there will be financial implications for both councils. So, further to the support, could the Cabinet Secretary develop what support it provides in the near future to the Borders Council, and in the future, should these alternative arrangements with Midlothian be required?
Cabinet Secretary.
The first point to make is that the responsibility for the delivery of education at local level rests statutorial with the local authority. So the local authority has to address the continuous provision of education for young people. Now, clearly, there is an opportunity in a variety of different school accommodation in the surrounding area to Peebles, and Christine Graham has cited a couple of examples in the Pennycook area, which could be utilised if the local authority judged that to be the appropriate course of action. Now, what helps us in this situation is that both Midlothian and Scottish Borders Council are part of the South East of Scotland Regional Improvement Collaborative. These collaboratives were established to encourage cooperation amongst local authorities in the provision and enhancement of education. And another participant within the South East of Improvement Collaborative is Fife Council, who have had to wrestle with some identical issues in relation to Woodmill High School in Dunfermline. So I'm quite sure there can be discussion across local authority borders to address the very issue that Christine Graham has raised, and which is a matter for the local authority to resolve. In relation to the role of the Scottish Government, I reiterate what I said in my earlier answer. The Government will be very happy to assist the Scottish Borders Council in any way we can to try to minimise any disruption to the learning of young people.
Christine Graham.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary, that's very helpful. Could I ask him to focus perhaps on the issue of pupils sitting their prelims and exams who will find this extremely stressful? Is there anything there that the Scottish Government can do with its officials or by way of its assistance it can give towards those pupils in particular who must be concerned at the effect it may have on their results?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think that's an issue that we have to have uppermost in our minds. We don't want in any way a terrible incident of this type to disrupt the education of young people. Obviously, the school and the local authority are able to make representations to the Scottish Qualifications Authority about the implications for young people who will be involved in the examination diet in the spring, and obviously the internal prelim exams that the school will be taking forward can be adjusted, as the school has done, by delaying those prelims until January to make sure that young people have the opportunity to avoid being in any way affected by these events. There is a deeper question which affects all pupils and staff and also the community in Peebles High School, that this will have been a tremendous shock, if not a trauma, to young people, and that impact has to be addressed in the way in which we engage with and support and assist young people in coming to terms with the damage that has been done to their school. So these are issues which are very important to be cognizant about in working forward a way to support the young people and the staff of Peebles High School.
And Michelle Ballantyne.
Thank you. Can I also just reiterate my thoughts with the families and the children that are affected and the staff and the rescue services that did so much work to get out what was a huge fire at the time. Last year, the Scottish Fire and Rescue analysis, risk analysis of 470 schools in Scotland reported that 1 in 7 of the schools were a high fire risk. And obviously, we've seen a couple recently. So can the Cabinet Secretary advise what, if any, actions were taken as a result of that analysis? And also, there is quite a lot of concern amongst the constituents across the borders at the moment that having to rebuild Peebles High School will have an impact on other planned builds. So can the Cabinet Secretary reassure our constituents today that the school will be rebuilt without any impact to the planned new builds at Eyemouth and Elston?
Cabinet Secretary.
All of these issues are fundamentally the responsibility of Scottish Borders Council. The local authority carries the statutory responsibility to be assured of the quality of the school estate and to ensure that the school estate complies with all relevant guidelines. So it's important that the local authority satisfies itself of that obligation. In relation to the question of the possible rebuilding of Peebles High School, we don't yet know what the situation will be given the extent of the damage. I suspect there will be a significant challenge to address there. The Government will, of course, be very happy to engage in discussions with Scottish Borders Council on how we might assist in taking that forward. These are discussions that are constantly underway. Michelle Ballantyne will be familiar with the fact that the Government has opened another programme for investment in the learning estate, and the second phase of that programme will be available for consideration in the course of 2020. So we will, of course, be happy to have discussions with Scottish Borders Council as it becomes clear what is the route forward for the delivery of education in Peebles High School.
Thank you. Question number 3, Mark Ruskell.
To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the targets set out in the Queensferry Crossing public transport strategy, what its response is to reports that in the last year, over 1 million extra vehicle journeys have been made over the crossing.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, like the Forth Road Bridge, the Queensferry Crossing has 2 running lanes for traffic. As a result of the hard shoulder and windshielding, it is providing a more reliable and resilient crossing. The Scottish Government has invested in public transport corridor using the Forth Road Bridge, including park and ride and bus lanes, with journey time savings for bus being realised versus car travel at peak times between Fife and Edinburgh. We are committed to sustainable transport and encouraging greater use of public transport, as highlighted in our draft National Transport Strategy and this year's programme for government.
Mark Ruskell.
Commenting on these figures, the Institute of Advanced Motorists said, and I quote, that these are indicative of a failure of Scottish Government transport policy to reduce car usage. Their words, not mine, Cabinet Secretary. We're now 10 years on from the publication of the Public Transport Strategy, yet only 5 of the 18 recommendations have actually been delivered. When can we expect the full review of the strategy to be completed and actions delivered? Or will commuters be hanging around for another 2 decades?
Cabinet Secretary Michael Max.
Presiding Officer, the member will recognise we have made progress in a number of areas within the strategy, including some of the provisions which we've made, for example, in the City Region deal for the Edinburgh and Fife area, which will see some £20 million of additional investment get into transport infrastructure within the west of the city. And alongside that, I recently announced £70 million being invested in the reopening of the Leavenmouth railway line, which will connect Leavenmouth back into the Fife Circle, which will help to improve rail connectivity and public transport for a significant number of people who live within the Fife area. And as we've also set out within the draft National Transport Strategy, there are a range of other measures which we intend to take forward once the strategy is completed and in place. So I do recognise that there is certainly more for us to do, but I can assure the member that we are committed to taking forward a range of measures in helping to reduce car use and to improve the provision of public transport.
Mark Ruskell.
Perhaps I could focus the Cabinet Secretary on those actions that have not been delivered. One of those outstanding actions is the strategy is to give commuters a genuine rail choice through a park and ride at Rosyth. It's been granted planning permission. It's a strategic priority for government. It's in the STPR. So why hasn't it been funded and actually built by now?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as is the case with a whole range of matters within STPR2, there is always competing financial demands for provision to be made in a number of different areas. And of course, issues which are not addressed within the STPR1 process will roll over into the STPR2 process and can be considered within the next STPR planning period. So the very issue which has been highlighted, which hasn't been delivered as yet, will be considered as part of the STPR2 process.
There are 4 members wish to ask supplementaries here. Jamie Green to be followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I just ask for a quick update from the Cabinet Secretary on the measures that have been taken by Transport Scotland to ensure that no motorists are affected by ice falling from the bridge this year?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the member will be aware that there was an incident back in March of last year where a combination of what were unusual weather circumstances that resulted in ice forming on some of the cables within the Queensferry crossing. This is unusual for a building of its nature or for a structure of its nature, and given the weather that formed at that particular time. But the expert advice which has been provided to Transport Scotland is that there are a number of measures that can be put in place in order to monitor this more closely. And as it stands at the present time, that work is out to procurement with a view to having the appropriate measures put in place at some point in the near future.
Colin Smith to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Transport remains Scotland's most polluting sector, responsible for a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. But last year, car usage increased while rail flatlined and bus passenger numbers continued to plummet. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell us whether the Scottish Government is working towards an overall target to reduce car usage? And if so, what is that target?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm sure, Presiding Officer, that irony is not lost on members that the very party that so oppose workplace parking levies is here demanding that we take action on reducing car use within our road network. And also, given that very often he's here demanding that we build further roads in the southwest of Scotland for car use, again, I think it's not lost on members about the contradiction in Labour's position on these issues. What I can assure the member of is that we are taking forward a range of measures, including almost £5 billion of investment in the next control period into rail in Scotland. And alongside that, what is the biggest investment in bus privatisation in the last 2 decades, with some £500 million being committed to helping to improve bus patronage and to help to improve bus privatisation. And as we've set out within the draft National Transport Strategy, the hierarchy of approach that we will take in terms of future investment to make sure that our priorities are to encourage greater use of public transport.
Fulton McGregor, to be followed by Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd ask the Cabinet Secretary if he can reiterate some of the major benefits of the Forth Road Bridge public transport corridor.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, one of the real benefits that comes from the public transport corridor across the Forth Road Bridge is it provides a very much more efficient and quicker link between Fife and Edinburgh for the use of bus and also for taxis. We can see that from the journey times that have been reduced for bus and also for taxi journeys crossing between Edinburgh and Fife and Edinburgh, and the benefits that come from that. What we want to do is make greater use of that. And as it stands at the present moment, there are something in the region of 500 buses now using the Forth Road Bridge public transport corridor on a daily basis, and we want to see that being built on in order to make greater use of public transport across the Forth.
Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary anticipate that the use of the bridge will increase when all the works on the bridge have been completed, including things like putting lifts up in the pillars? And when will that be?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm surprised that the member isn't aware as the convener of the REC committee, given that we have already set out the snagging works that will be completed and that the contractor expects to complete that by the end of this year, but some of the work is weather related. And as I've always said, I will keep the committee up to date on these issues. But alongside that, what I can also say to the member is that he will also understand that there is an assessment and evaluation which is undertaken at Year 1, Year 3 and Year 5 of the performance of any major infrastructure project of this nature. And the Year 1 work, evaluation, initial work has already started, which will give us an understanding of the progress that's been made and the use of the bridge and how it's performing. And alongside that, that will then be repeated at Year 3 and Year 5, so that we have a good overall view of its performance and the benefits that are coming from such a major piece of infrastructure.
Thank you very much to Minister and members. That concludes topical questions.